Yes, team. Welcome to another episode of the Total Mental Performance Podcast. Today is a really spontaneous episode. Today's guest is Charlene Gisele. She is a specialist and high performance coach. She has a background, she was actually a former lawyer, and she's now become a burnout specialist, working with professionals, athletes, specifically around that topic. And it was quite cool. We were speaking about shooting an episode. I think it was maybe even last year or the beginning of this year. Charlene went away traveling, and then she booked on an old link that was we don't even use anymore to book in because we couldn't make the first time. And then I just looked at my diary today, and here it was. And then Kirsten asked me, she's like, should we keep running this? Shall we not? In my head, and I was like, no, let's run with it. Let's go with it. So we did. So Charlene, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. Finally.
I love being here, and I love it especially that it was a show so highly recommended by my own clients who love listening to you. So there you go. It's a full circle, I love that synchronicity.
Cool. So just share our audience, what is it that you do and how did you get into burnout?
Yes. How does one get into burnout professionally? Well, you have to have some kind of major catastrophic burnout happened in the first place, right? It's certainly not a profession that I woke up one day thinking I'm going to do when I grow up, right? When I was a little girl, actually, the only thing I was obsessed with was becoming a lawyer. I was completely obsessed with it. That's all I wanted to do. And I did that. I worked at one of the largest, biggest, most powerful American law firm in the world. I was a construction litigator. I worked all the hours under the sun and the night. And frankly, I loved it. So, often when you tell that story, you think, oh, she's going to say she didn't love it. It was too much. She got stressed. But quite the opposite. I would say that drug was my favorite narcotics. I was totally addicted to the highs, the chase, the adrenaline. And I didn't realize the cost that I was paying. I was diagnosed with clinical insomnia, but at the time, I know this is an awful thing to say. I thought, well, it means I can do more all-nighters. I can work more, right? I'm insomniac anyway, so more work. My marriage was hanging by a thread. I actually got a full divorce because my husband, at the time, my ex-husband said, you're not married to me, you're married to work, which was true. And even then, my mindset was, well, there you go. I can work more now that I'm alone, right? It was just completely upside down way of thinking. And everything that happened to me up until that point just led me to the direction of being an excuse to work some more. So if I had a bad health diagnosis, my go-to was more work. If things didn't go well with my family, the thing that would make me feel better was my work, right? Up until the point where my mom actually called me in the office to tell me that my father had a burnout-driven heart attack on his way to work. And I'm embarrassed to say that, but at the time I thought, well, no, I should really keep on working rather than go to the hospital. So I didn't go. And when I went, it was almost too late. He had a stroke before my eyes. And it's only when he survived the heart attack and the surgery that I made a commitment to myself that I had to just, be something else, do something else to help people like my father, people like myself who were in total denial and see really what burnout is all about, because I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't like the sound of it, and I certainly didn't like the fact that I had it. So I thought, what are the tools to, A, understand how I got myself there to begin with, and B, understand how I can help other folks out there prevent it effectively.
Sounds like unconsciously your father imprinted a work ethic and an energetic frequency that created a central nervous system, which was like, this is fine, this is normal, just this is what we do, and this is how we go, which is fascinating. And when you look at law and you look at lawyers, like those guys and girls, they just work and they work and they work and they work. I totally resonate with the mindset of, well, it's fine. Like, I'll just work. I have insomnia, so you weaponize your insomnia. So you would just work more. I had fear of failure and anxiousness, so I just weaponized that to be more productive and make sure I always smash my targets. And it's like this. I see this with a lot of high performers, particularly in corporate and from my former corporate days. A lot of these issues are just weaponized dysfunction in order to be productive. And it just sounds like you looked at that and you went, it's particularly with your father and seeing, that's where this ends up, or I don't need to write that same story. It sounds like that was quite a contrasting moment for you to go, oh, okay, something needs to change. Was it as black and
Exactly.
white as that? Or was there like a period of gray before you made the change?
No, and I wish there had been. But the way I did it is I waited for the car crash. And it's so easy, quote unquote easy, to say, don't wait for that. Prevention better than cure. Yes, yes, yes. I think we all agree intellectually. But unfortunately, the reality is so many of my clients up until today, they tend to wait for one of those catastrophic moments to happen. So, in my line of work, I often say that there are 3Ds that hit just before burnout happens. So, first A is the A for divorce. So typically, if you're in a married or committed relationship, your partner is going to be fed up with you or the way you work. So
Mhm.
there's going to be some kind of divorce threat thrown around, or you're going to end up divorced altogether, like it happened to me. So that's the first I usually tell my clients you might want to have a consultation with me before you hire your divorce attorney. So
Mhm.
that's typically, and I unfortunately or fortunately work with a lot of divorce attorneys because that's usually part of the same equation. B, it's the diagnosis. So many of my clients call me literally the day after they've had a diagnosis, be it type 2 diabetes, stroke, a heart attack, cancer, some kind of metabolic health condition. And they just have a mental breakdown. Depression as well, very common, often misdiagnosed, but that's most likely another topic. But one of those diagnoses. And then the third D is the most morbid one, but it's death, and it's death in the family or death at work. I've had, one of my greatest friend had their own boss dies in the office in front of them through a heart attack, or your doctor telling you you have X amount of years to live. So that notion of morbidity and looming death is often another reason why you have a wake up call. And certainly for me, that near death incident with my father and his survival was really the leverage. And I would love to sit here and tell you, oh, I had a very nuanced approach to burnout. I took some preventative measure, but no, I didn't. I waited for the catastrophic incident. I waited for the divorce, the heart attack, and all of that to take action.
Yeah, sometimes things have to fall apart in order to put them back together again. And I think,
Exactly.
particularly with really driven, ambitious people, I'm not talking about people that, I want to achieve my goals next year. It's like, no, I'm going to win at all costs and I'm going to push myself at all costs and go into really dark, uncharted territory because that's where I feel comfortable and that's where I feel safe. Usually it's running away from feelings, negative self worth. But I know when I hit burnout, and I had my near miss of suicide, I know for me that it doesn't matter what you would have said to me, I'd have just ignored it and I'd have just kept going and going and going and going and going. And it took that really, oh, I'm actually a mess, and as much as my career might be telling me I am or I'm not or whatever, actually, for some people, you have to smash the plate in order for someone to get the message. And as nice as it would be, for that preventative side, it's not usually that. It usually is, things have got to go bang. But what I'm really curious about is often I don't really work with burnout clients. I work with many fatigued clients and anxious clients, but I don't really work with those really in burnout. But I do get a lot of clients coming to me, and they're like, "I think I'm burnt out." Or we have a lot of coaches in our program, and they say, "Oh, I think I'm hitting coaching burnout." And often I say, "Are you really burnt out, or are you just fatigued?" So as somebody that's an expert in this field, I would love to get your take. What actually are the key signs of burnout, and what are the key signs of fatigue, and what's the difference between the two in how you see it?
That's such a good question. So perhaps it might be useful at this point to set a little bit of a chronology and definition. So burnout was actually a term that was coined for the very first time in the 1970s. So it's not quite recent, but it was coined in the term in the context of medical care, and
Mhm.
specifically it was coined by a psychologist and psychiatrist who was looking at the impact that nurses and doctors had after caring so much for their patients. So a
Mhm.
form of vicarious trauma. And he came up with the term burnout in that context. But, and this is really important to highlight, no one really accepted it in the medical world, and certainly not the World Health Organization. In other words, you couldn't really have seen a doctor 15 years ago and get a burnout diagnosis. That was not a thing. We could talk about it, it was a bit known on the street, but it was not really a known condition. Now, it's still important to clarify that burnout is not a medical diagnosed condition. So you can't still, to this day in 2025, have a burnout diagnosis. You can say that and you can have a leave which says burnout, but it's not considered a medical diagnosis. What it's considered instead is a syndrome. And it's only in 2019, which is really yesterday in the world of medical history, that the World Health Organization actually recognized burnout as real, as a syndrome driven by, and this is really the answer, long-winded answer to your question, three things. So there are three characteristics that set out burnout aside or apart from fatigue or stress. Number one, it has to have a physiological element. In other words, there has to be that not just fatigue, because fatigue could be experienced in a 24-hour cycle, right? You could be fatigued on Monday because perhaps you just hangover from the weekend, or you just are sleep deficient, but you could be okay on Tuesday after a good night's sleep, right? That is possible. Or you could be fatigued after a performance, after a boxing match, because your muscle are fatigued, but you could be fine the day after a deep relaxing massage and a restoring meal. Burnout is a lot deeper than that. So you're not just feeling better after a good night's sleep or a good meal. You are totally depleted, exhausted, even after sleep, even when you wake up, even after a full weekend of rest, even without substances, right? It's that exhaustion. It's the equivalent metaphorically of your phone's battery being drained. So drained that it's taking a time to charge again, right? So you're totally drained out. That's a physiological component. The second, which is really important, and also it's unique to burnout compared to fatigue or stress, is that you have a cynical, or the World Health Organization defines it as a mental distance that you have with your job. In everyday language, you're jaded, you're blasé, you're a little bit numb. You don't have that love, that passion, that sparkle in your eyes. In other words, you're logging in on Monday and you're thinking, OF, right? Like it's a bit of,
I like the word checked out. You're checked out. You're already
okay,
checked out. You just all right.
I couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, you might want to suggest to the Health Organization that they change the
I'll
definition.
drop them an email.
You're checked out. That's it. So you're still showing up, by the way. You're not missing work. This is really important to notice. So you're just clocking in, you're getting work done. You're not missing deadlines or anything like that, but your heart is not in it anymore. Okay, so that's a mental distancing. And also, really worth noting at this point that according to the World Health Organization, if we want to be, I know it's very semantical, but if we want to be correct with definition, burnout can only be used in the context of professional anxiety and stress. It's mismanaged professional stress. So you'll see a lot of people using, oh, I'm burned out from my political campaign, or I'm burned out from climate changes, or I'm burnt out from this and that. And, I am certainly not one to judge or validate whether their experience is burnout or not. But if they're not in a job position or in a professional context, or if it's a volunteering position, or if it's not a paid profession or a job, it's technically not falling within the World Health definition. So then I get a hot topic and huge debate about, parental duties, because a lot of them, it's unpaid work, but it is certainly work. So therefore, can it be burnout? That's perhaps another question for another day. But those lead to very interesting questions. And the third final element, which is also very, very important and completely different from fatigue, is that there is a lack of efficiency in the performance. Now, let's make sure we're specific. It doesn't mean you dropped the ball, doesn't mean you're about to get sacked, and it doesn't mean you missed the deadline. But your efficiency is not where it used to be. In other words, you're still doing the work, but the cost of doing that work is 10x. So for you to do that email to your boss, it's costing you a ton of mental energy. Your professional efficacy has been hugely reduced. And again, this is not necessarily a component of fatigue. It can be, but it's not as ingrained in fatigue or stress. So again, if somebody says, what is the difference between burnout and stress? Stress can be acute. Stress can be positive, like eustress. Psychologically, it's good stress, or stress can be negative. Burnout is actually something that you would see in the long term, right? So burnout typically does not happen overnight. It doesn't typically happen in a week or a month either. It's gradual. It's usually over a few years. And then the truth about burnout as well, which is hard to hear, is it doesn't heal in a day, right? So my shortest span of burnout intervention tend to be 3 months. And that's what I would call, a bed. It's a terrible wording, but baby burnout, right? Like just short-term burnout. Realistically, when I have high performers, we're looking at a 6 months, 9 months, 12 months recovery period.
Mm. And on that, particularly with the efficiency at work, and I use the metaphor that it's like you've got a blade or you've got a machete and you're trying to chop through the jungle. And actually, if it's just completely blunt, you're not going to chop through that jungle. You're going to be working even harder. I totally get it. What would you say the time period for that lack of mental efficiency and productivity would be? Is there a is that specified, or in your experience, would you say? Because we all experience that from time to time, right? But would you say, yeah, if you've been experiencing that for X amount of months, that is how you know you're in burnout territory versus fatigue territory? As an example.
It's an excellent question. I really like to use the over 3 months time frame, because very often I find that 3 months is a good gauge. Like, for example, let's say you just got a promotion. You might be burning on all cylinder for the first 3 months post promotion. Could be like you're hitting this really intense period, or is year end, right? You're working. A lot of people are kind of playing with and toying with and on the cusp of burnout mid-November, right? Like it's a popular burnout season, year end, etc. But is it truly burnout? Again, if you feel that after that thing, that milestone, you get to breathe again and you feel fully restored and your anxiety level drop down to baseline, then again, it could have been a baby burnout, but I wouldn't say you necessarily have this deep, dark burnout that necessitate an intervention. And when it comes to burnout, I like to think about two phases, and I think they're really important to talk about. There is the prevention phase, and there is the recovery phase. Typically, after a burnout intervention is when there is acute burnout. Then there is the burnout intervention. So the burnout intervention is the psychological, emotional, physiological support that you will give that particular client or patient to ensure that they can recover. But shortly thereafter, there has to be a prevention, even though you recovered. That may sound paradoxical, but what prevention am I talking about? Because a lot of the time people get this chronology wrong. They think prevention should come before burnout. But that's in an ideal world. It's very rare, in fact. Typically, there is first the burnout, then the intervention, followed by the recovery, followed by the prevention of the next avoidable burnout phase. So, to give you a very concrete example, I burnt out, there was an intervention, I recovered, And ever since that recovery point, I've been in burnout prevention mode. In other words, being burnout prone means that every day I lean on my coaches, my therapists, my now new husband, my family, my support system, myself to make sure that I don't burn out again. And I think that's a message that's really important to highlight because as much as I love repeat customers, it's not good for
Totally
their
agree.
psychological. Like in my line of business, repeat customer is actually a sign of not great service provided, right? I say this with a bit of humor, but in all seriousness, I love working very long term with clients that have recovered and then stay with me for prevention. But what I really don't want to see happen, and I do everything within my power to avoid, is see someone burn out, have an intervention with me, and then burn out again. Then it means that there hasn't been sufficient tools to prevent that second cycle of burnout again.
Mm. Yeah, it makes total sense, and we have a shared value insofar as preventative. I've never really looked at it like that. I've more looked at it like a commercial boxing athlete. So in boxing, you have your corner man. So they will often be in charge of the strategy of who you're going to box and who you're going to fight and how you're going to pick them apart and win. Then you have your nutritionist, and then you'll have your strength and conditioning coach, and then you might have a mental performance or mindset coach, and that tends to be your team. So it's about having that support network and those people that you can lean on, that you can raise your hand and go, I'm feeling a little bit off, and I think it's the same thing. It's having those people around you because you can't read the bottle. You can't read the label from inside the bottle. So when you have those other people that are just looking in at the chaos inside of the bottle, they go, I got a feeling you're doing that overworking thing. One of my mentors actually, I came to him, I signed up with him, and I was like, right, I want to double my company in the next, I want to double my company in the next 12 months. And he said, okay, how do you feel? And I said, I'm quite tired and stressed. And he goes, okay, tell me more. Like, how have the last 12 months been for you? And I was like, well, I've been sick and injured like 8 times. And he goes, 8 times you've been sick and injured? I said, yeah. And he goes, there's no way you're doubling this company, dude. And I went, what do you mean? He goes, because it will completely fold in on itself. And your problem is because you've had some really intense burnout in the past that you have had to, like, mental health breakdown, completely have to rebuild from scratch. That's your new low point, and you've just normalized this new level of output, and it's not really a big deal. But the reality is you've been sick and injured 8 times. So if you double your company, you'll break. So we spent what I thought was going to be 6 months on what decisions do I need to make, how do I need to get to. He went, no. We got to focus on how you're working, how you're sleeping, how you're showing up, how you're doing this, how you're doing that. And what was funny was we focused on that, and then I hit all of my other objectives. So it really does go to show that if you do have those people in your corner and you have those cornermen, they can point, you're about to do that thing again, you're about to do that thing again. And now I have a playbook. My mentor can just go, you're doing that thing again. And I'm like, okay. And then they just knock me back onto the path. So I totally see that. I'd love to play with some archetypes because
Please do.
I find like archetypes and stories and characters are a really nice way of us to learn. If you could paint me a picture of, okay, Kieran, this is what burnout Bertie looks like, and here's how he presents. And actually, here is fatigued Freddie. And whilst the symptoms might look really similar, actually here is the difference. And maybe that's how they show up. Maybe that's their internal dialogue. Maybe it's external symptoms. Because I do think a lot of business owners, particularly in their first couple of years of business, they do use, it's not necessarily an excuse, but they tell themselves a story. I'm burnt out. I'm burnt out. I'm burnt out. And it's like, you're not burnt out. You're fatigued. It's just this belief that you have that you're burnt out is keeping you stuck in that loop. So if you could paint us that picture of those two people,
Yes, of course, we
what would
love
it look
that.
like?
So it was Barty.
But we got burnt out Bertie, and then we got
Barty.
fatigued Freddie.
Love it. Okay, so Freddie. Freddie is fatigued. He's just going through a really rough work period. When he comes home to his spouse, he's, opening his bottle of wine and having a couple of glasses and tends to not drink that much on school nights, maybe a bit heavier at the weekend. And that's it, still enjoys the like nice, cozy, and then talks about how work is not going that well with his wife and moans and the usual. Barty, on the other hand, will be literally adjusting the quantity of wine or beers or whiskey to the amount of stress and anxiety he's feeling. He won't necessarily open or crack up a nice bottle of wine with his wife to talk about work. He would even hide quite how much he started to drink alone from his wife. So, in other words, he's using coping mechanism that make him feel a bit shameful, a bit there is a part deep down to his behavior that he recognizes as it's changing and shifting. For example, Barty will typically be always charming and the kind of wonderful business entertainer that has a couple of glasses or maybe more of wine while entertaining client and then comes back to his hotel, have a conversation with his wife and go to sleep. Now, instead, his mode of operation is he'll have the glasses of wine with the client, go to the hotel, go down to the local shop, buy another bottle, and sedate himself to sleep. Bart is also starting to rely on stimulant in the morning. So he's looking for things to put him down, and he started to get prescription for things to put him up. So whether it's narcotics, substances, maybe he's also gotten some kind of diagnosis that he might have forged a little bit for some kind of condition that will give him access to some kind of stimulants. If he's not using class A drugs, he may be using or misusing medication. A lot of my clients, for example, who don't actually have a clinical diagnosed ADHD will use, overuse, and abuse Adderall as a stimulant to just stay up and also compensate for the hangover or the substances that they took the night before. Freddie, on the other hand, is just, gonna have an extra espresso, maybe, and going to have slightly jigger and anxiety and a bit of complaining about the fact that his coffee intake has gone from 2 to 3 because he's feeling a bit under the weather and a bit overwhelmed and a bit stressed out in this current work period. Fred is still, rushing to his meeting and doesn't have time to properly eat and may not be doing the best things with his nutrition. And sometimes he'll grab the fries and the sandwich, even though he knows that he shouldn't. And he might have the unusual cookies and feel a bit bad about it, but nothing too dramatic. And he does sometimes use a little bit of a sweet tooth to cope with his stress. Now, Barty, on the other hand, has put on 10 pounds and is struggling to close his trousers in the morning. And he even has to go up a size in his suit. And he's using food as a coping mechanism to numb, to soothe, to escape, because it's one way that gets him a little bit higher when he feels really, really low. He also tends to eat this kind of junk away from people. In other words, he's starting to hide, conceal, and really have behavior that are quite secretive. Freddie, when it comes to Friday, he is going to complain about his week. He's going to maybe head to the pub, have a few pints, just, talk badly about his boss as people do. Barty on Friday, he's going to cancel plans. He's going to make up excuses. He's gonna tell that he's meeting with someone, even though he's not, to stay alone, really, because he's got nothing left to give. And on Saturday morning, normally for years, Barty used to go play golf. He doesn't even want to. He doesn't even want to see the side of a golf course. And his wife is kind of lovingly asking, hey, you haven't been golfing for months. He's like, oh, just leave me be. And he's on Netflix for the whole of Saturday, even on a sunny day, because he's just too exhausted to even walk his dog. He used to walk the dog, and that's the kind of thing he used to do, but he doesn't even have it in him. Barty on Sunday is starting to have serious sleep anxiety. In other words, he's starting to dread the week ahead with a feeling of doom and gloom and this dark feeling of almost that I can't breathe just thinking about what's looming. And this Sunday dread is so intense that he gets pissed off. He snaps at his wife. He doesn't pay attention to his daughter. He lost his patience with the dog. He's unbearable. His temper has gotten shorter. He has anger outbursts. He lost it in his car because of the traffic light. And frankly, he's just not the most pleasant person to be around. Freddie, on the other hand, he's like kind of a bit stressed, kind of a bit on edge. So is that helpful as
Oh,
kind
it's
of painting
beautiful.
the
Yeah,
difference?
yeah, really beautiful picture. It's funny, particularly with the food. You was describing me with when I burnt out. I ended up with a binge eating disorder, but it didn't help because of the boxing, and I was in a weight category for where I was at. So I always had to be in a weight category. But then I was burnt out because I was overtraining and I was having like 1,400 calories a day, training 2, 3 times a day, 5 times a week, and it was like this constant horror. The alcohol wasn't a thing because I had like monk like I can't drink because I can't fight. But everything that you was describing, the numbing out, the shame, the stimulants, all of that, it was exactly that. And I think when we share these stories, that there'll be some people that I think are experiencing burnout, but perhaps lean less on alcohol. So, could you give not the whole thing again, but for somebody that didn't drink, as an example,
Sure.
could you give me some examples of alternative coping mechanisms that they might be using? Because I think you've painted the picture perfectly. It definitely makes sense. One's on edge. The other one is, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, and they're hiding and they're shameful. I totally get that. What are other ways that presents if alcohol or narcotics wasn't the
It's a
drivers?
really good question, and it's relationship damage. So typically, you become just not that pleasant to be around. So you could be either the kind of person that has anger outbursts, and that could even happen in the office. So of course, in the office, we still have the mask of professional appearances, but still, you could say something that you regret to your team or say in a way that you regret. You could lose patience very quickly. You could neglect relationship. So a lot of people that don't turn to alcohol or substances will turn to a form of social compensation through ideation and isolation. So, what do I mean? Ideation, they're going to think about things that they could do by way of escape mechanism. So, they're going to get lost in TikTok, in Instagram, LinkedIn, toxic comparison, a lot of professional. You'd be surprised how LinkedIn is their drug of choice. I love LinkedIn, use it, love it. But it's really important to understand that when you're really in the burnout phase, LinkedIn can actually be a tool via which there is a lot of self loathing, right? F, this guy got the promotion and I'm still a loser. He made equity partner and I'm still senior associate. He did this, she did that, and I did that. They were keynote speaker and I didn't. So that can be really negative comparison. I'm sure for you, the equivalent in boxing would be like looking at other folks that are
Oh
in the
yeah, yeah. This
boxing,
guy's
right?
winning this fight, or oh my god, this guy at the weight class above me, I can't move up because like I won't be good enough. All of it. Yeah. All
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing that we start to do if with that social isolation is binge consuming. So if we're not binge eating, if we're not binge drinking, we can be binge watching.
yeah.
So
Binging. Yeah.
Netflix, yeah. So numbing, like you just watch series, nonsense, crap TV. So that's really, really interesting. You know what I love, Karen, is when I work with high performers who tell me they have no time, and then I kind of trick them. I say
Mm.
trick with love, like gently, a gentle trick. And I say, "Oh, right, have you heard about this show?" Just to kind of start a conversation. That, oh yeah, I finished all the season, and I know that the show started only 3 months ago. It's like, oh really? So you somehow had time to watch all those episodes, right? So that's that. Another really, really important one is binge shopping. So the worse I feel, the more I spend mindset. I have a lot of clients who don't use alcohol or narcotics, but they will use their Amex. And actually, this can also cause a lot of damage in a relationship. Like, I had a client who was so concerned with their husband spending because it got to sky high level. And it's almost like a kind of grandiose moment where you think you can afford this and that, and you buy and you buy, but it's like compulsive buying as well. So hyper consumerism. And then I know this is a controversial topic, and I'm hoping that it's okay to bring that up, but sex as well. So a lot of clients in that moment will engage in reckless behavior. So would it be, having a kind of affair that is quite not just controversial but quite dangerous, so they would put their career at stake. So typically that would be an affair in the office with a younger member of the team. I know that sounds like a cliche, but cliche are cautionary tales. So that, in my line of work, I see this every day. So why is this so dangerous? Again, not applying judgment on infidelity, but those typical affairs will have the added element of it's someone from the office and I could lose my job. So that's typically a subconscious decision to sabotage your career.
Yeah, yeah.
So a
Makes
lot of
sense.
my male clients come to me, and literally one of the first things that came up in the conversation is that they slept with somebody in the office when they got horrendously drunk on the last Christmas party. So December is a popular time for my bookings.
Mm.
um, that's that. The other one that I get a lot of is engaging in sexual behavior, such as hiring escorts and working with prostitutes. So that would typically happen when, again, you're looking for that quick fix, that escapism, your marriage is breaking apart, or you're not in a married committed relationship. And instead of wanting to, so let's say you're single, normally you would go, as in typically my clients before burnout, they would seek romantic behavior through dating and engaging in a relationship, whereas there is a courting phase and a honeymoon and dinners and cinemas and movies, etc., and then natural sexual intimacy would follow. But when you're burnt out, you can't be fucked with all of that jazz, right? So you just want to get to the sex part. So the way to hijack that process and just get to the result that you want is you just pay for sex, right? Because it's quicker, it's more efficient, and you just eliminate the whole process that has more energy cost. But then you can end up in pretty difficult situation, because that breeds another form of addiction, which is often sex addiction. So that really leads to an important topic, is that burnout actually stems from work or performance addiction, right? So for you, it was boxing. For some of my clients, it's trading. For others, it's lawyering. So it's a form of addiction to performance, status, power, recognition in any walks of life. So that's really the initial form of addiction. From that initial addiction, a branch or tree happens of other correlated addiction. So one addiction, which is the initial addiction, work or performance or status addiction, leads to alcohol addiction, food addiction, sex addiction, gambling addiction, spending addiction, right? So those are actually not consequences of burnout, they're direct effect of the burnout. They're sort of cousins of the burnout. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it's super helpful. And I suspect in many of the clients you work with, there'll be undiagnosed ADHD, autism, and lots of neurological disorders. I say disorders. I've been diagnosed with ADHD. They're not disorders. They're just different neurological wirings. But yeah, it's so funny. So much of what you're saying is exactly what I was experiencing when I was really going through that. Those addictive patterns of just going and going and going and going and going. Which is interesting because my view of mental performance has definitely shifted over the last few years. For me now, it's more about flow and enjoyment of the task at hand and being able to perform in that way. Whereas before, it was a lot more about squeezing as much out as you can. After my boxing, I went into software sales. I had a corporate career, and again, it's just same thing. Weaponized anxiety. Got to hit the target. Got to be at the top of the board. Go 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 go. There's just another form of addiction, right? Which was, give you the
Yes.
dopamine of being the top, and then also falling in love with being at the bottom when you're not winning. And yeah, and I think uh, everything that you're saying there, it's it's a spiral. I got a question for you as a practitioner, because often I refer out burnout clients that are truly in that phase of, I don't want to do this anymore. I usually, when a client comes to me, I say, look, don't invest in this. This isn't a good move. What you need is more of a specialist intervention specifically built for that problem. I work with a lot of Freddie the fatigued, but when it comes to that, but having been through that and having been through the therapeutic journey required to get out of that, I often refer out. Um, but yeah, what I am curious is for you as a practitioner, those clients, and when I was a cognitive therapist and I was predominantly working in the therapy space, they're really draining. Like that, having a big clientele of those clients can be quite difficult. So, how do you stay in the game, and how do you make sure that there's no transference and you're not pulled into that back into that energetic frequency?
Yeah, this is most likely one of my favorite questions. So the first thing is, I think it's important to really go back to the etymology of compassion, right? So the idea of being there, but it's not happening to you. So when I'm listening to a story and my client is confiding into me, although I'm extremely compassionate, I am not going to associate into their stories. In other words, I'm not reliving their trauma, their PTSD, their story as if it was a relived experience. And one can only truly do that as a practitioner once we've done our inner work. So, the first foundation piece for me before I could call myself a practitioner and before I could serve other clients at the highest level was to self-serve and was to be healed and be taken care of and be looked after. So that's just the first thing that I wanted to mention. But then the second is, and I know this is not going to sound particularly sexy, but it's discipline. So I actually have an extremely disciplined lifestyle, and I know that there is a lot of idealism towards being an epicurean, a bon vivant, and just doing whatever you want whenever you want. Sure, if you want to dismantle life and burn out quite quickly, I had a good taste of that lifestyle. I like to work hard. I played even harder. I did all the naughty things that one can do in these scenes and environments. And the reality is, discipline for me is the key to sustaining that leadership and that wellness for my clients. So it's not magic, it's pure science and neuroscience. So let me give you a very concrete example. Today I'm doing a hypnotherapy session, coaching, podcast recording, and I'm also 5 months pregnant. And it's
Congratulations.
how do I manage my energy? Well, I set myself up to a bedtime, and I know I'm not a child, but I have a strict bedtime, particularly when I know that I have a very big day ahead with different time zone. I'm very, very, very disciplined with my bedtime. I don't have just an alarm for the morning. I have an alarm at night to tell me when to go to bed and remind me, because I'm very prone to staying up if I don't have reminders. I have a food system in place whereby I plan ahead to make sure that I got my macros and my micro, and I batch cook at the weekend with my family to make sure that I have enough nutrition. I'm very pro animal based diet to ensure that I run on enough animal protein and animal fat. So I'm very pro healthy fat. I don't really believe in low fat diets. I eat a lot of collagen and a lot of food that is low inflammatory for my brain. So my brain is my biggest asset to listen, to make sharp decision, and to look after my clients with love and compassion. So I look at my whole body as an engine to work and to serve. So my sleep is a foundation, my nutrition, and then the health of my relationships. In my previous broken marriage that ended up in a divorce, my ex-husband was not at the top of my priority list, if I'm being very honest. And I'm so grateful for that divorce because I've learned the hard lesson. And I know this is a weird thing to say, but when I met my now new husband, it was now 8 years ago, so it's not that new. But I remember when I did say that I was a divorcee, I actually kind of pitched it in the sense that I know it's often perceived at a societal level as a failure. But for me, being a divorcee was a serious life lesson. I was like, well, this is everything that I've done wrong, and I've learned the cost, I've paid that price. And so that's everything that I shall not do again and will not do again if you be willing to be the one who does it with me. Right. So I looked at my divorce as a massive life lesson. And the reason I mention it in the context of burnout prevention is because really we need love. The reason I can love on my clients so much, within professional boundaries, and I use the word love because there is a lot of love and care, and particularly clients that are profoundly burned out, they need to feel that level of love, right? It's a very beautiful, it's a very pure, it's a very professional kind of love, but love in the sense of being fully present, fully grounded, not thinking about what's happened in your life. When my clients talk to me, nothing else is going through my mind. I'm just entirely theirs. I am with them. I am listening to every word. I'm not distracted. And I'm able to be in that state because after that session and before that session, I have so much love in my life that I nurture and I fuel, and that fuels me. Right. So I really think that it's quite hard to love on clients if you haven't been receiving a lot of love and you don't have a lot of love to give. Right. I feel like every session I have a surplus available, and I don't feel that I'm depleted because I know where my boundary is. And I also know that I've made mistakes. When I started as a practitioner, I would overbook myself a little bit, not intentionally, but because I thought I could. And what I learned over the years is just because you can doesn't mean you should. I know I have the capacity to serve 6 clients a day, but I don't anymore. I used to, but now I know that my happy number is 3 clients a day. That may seem very little for folks listening, but I know that that's the number that keeps me well and keeps me serving my burnt out client at the highest possible level.
Yeah, I echo all of that. And I think that's really important because we have a lot of coaches that listen to this podcast, and everything that they totally agree. At the first point, I say clients, when they ask me that questions, I say, well, look, how do you not get burnt out by all of this? For me, this is how I visualize those sessions. It's like as they're speaking, I'm looking at an equation. There's an equation in front of me, and I'm going. Obviously, there's empathy, but I'm not getting caught up in the content. I'm looking at the equation and going, this could be an A equals B equation, but it might be a completely different equation. And you create that distance. I think working capacity is something that's really important, and that's something I work with a lot of my clients in any field. If you're not clear on what your working capacity is, and not 100%, because if you work at 100% all of the time, you're not going to have any breathing space. You're going to crash the car. But what is your 80% working capacity, and staying within that, and then discipline, particularly around structure. As well. But I think when you have been somebody that has achieved a lot of success on high output, your relationship is my outputs must be really high in order for me to be successful. But actually, when that's great when you're starting out, but when you are more experienced in that field, actually less is more. And then as you start to do less, you get into more flow, and that's the compound effect. I'm very aware of time, and I know you got to jump off for your next session. But yeah, I'm really glad I listened to my intuition to spontaneously jump on and have this conversation. So thank you so much for jumping on. If somebody's listening to this and they're going, I am burnt out, Bertie. I'm riddled with shame. I'm masking. I'm doing all of the numbing out procedures that have been spoken about today, and I need help. I'm in crisis mode. Where can somebody find you, and what's the best? What's the best place to send them to?
Well, I have 2 resources that I would like to give to that person. The first one is I have a completely free complimentary burnout test, first batch of my website. So if you go to www.charlenegisele.com, you can click on burnout assessment. It's not a medical diagnosis. I just want to highlight it again, but it's an assessment that will tell you where you're at on the burnout scale and give you tools on how you can get better. And the second resource that I would love to give, and again, it's a complimentary resource, is that I have a podcast dedicated to burnout prevention. And every Wednesday, we talk about a different topic related to burnout and burnout prevention. So those 2 tools hopefully should really help at the first step.
Cool. Charlene, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
And thank you. And thank you for following your instinct and keeping me on the show. I really appreciate this part.
Thank you.